Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, dear viewer. Yet another. It's just gone live now, so I wonder if it's live now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Drone Stuff this week special. David Walters of Consortiq, who is in Canada Shire at the ICAO. Oh, I'm getting some feedback. Is that from you, David? Hang on. Let's see if it's from here. Here, I've got rid of it. I know why it is now. Sorry about that. So you're in Canada. You're at the ICAO meeting, and you are grabbing a few minutes to chat to us in the lunch break. So, where do you want to start?
Well, I tell you what, it's been a really busy but insightful week. There's a lot of discussion happening. There's a lot going on. Just to kind of give you a top-level summary, ICAO, from their point of view, are trying to help the standardization with regards to operations, regulations, registration, some involvement with the UTM. But the first part of this week, the ICAO Outpass symposium, it's the second one that they've had. There's been a lot of discussion about some of the operational issues that people are experiencing and having issues with. And we're not just talking your normal RPAS operators. The guy here from the United Nations, Ahmed, really nice guy, so passionate about what they're doing with regards to RPAS operations within the UN. I didn't realise the guys on the with regards to the UAS that they're flying, big fixed wing systems. You know, they're out there trying to keep the peace and helping humanitarian issues. The fact that their systems are getting targeted with ordinances whilst they're going through their pre-flight checks, they're coming under heavy gunfire. I mean, I thought my RPAS operational issues, you know, like dealing with the odd low-flying helicopter and things like that, you know, were just a big thing for me and having to deal with. But it's just something you're not aware of, you know, and you don't experience. And again, so the UN guys have asked quite open-handedly and passionately about how other organisations can help them with the flight planning, flight safety, any technology out there that can assist them with the work that they've got going on. He's probably one of the most passionate speakers that I heard speak this week, because the troubles that he's facing, you know, they're trying to do good, they're trying to get involved. There's hindrances as well with regards to regulation in certain countries and about their operational limits that they can fly. You know, they're flying some big aircraft, you know, some with 7-meter wingspans, but they're restricted to visual line of sight rules. You know,
that's the they fly the Falco things, don't they? I think.
Yeah, they've got a range of aircraft that they're currently operating.
I stopped you in your slide there, but it sounds like the perfect. Let's get a plug-in for your software before we go any further. That sounds like the perfect fit for what you actually do.
Well, I didn't want to release this video necessarily to plug our products, but we do have a flight operational product out there.
Well, you set it up, I'll knock it down.
Yeah, thank you. But I think you know, it was good to hear also from the guys in Italy about how they're handling a drone registration and some of the issues that they're facing. They actually have a live registration portal that they currently have active. And again, from an ICAO point, what they seem to be trying to do is, you know, help with some guidance, you know, and push that guidance out. It isn't necessarily a requirement of enforceable action. But then also there's regulators that are struggling to keep up with what ICAO are asking for. And again, that's been another topic this week.
Can you unpack that? I don't quite understand what you meant by that. Regulators are struggling to keep up with what ICAO. Can you unpack that for me a bit?
Yeah. So for example, you know, if some new advisory legislation comes out, or all of a sudden we want to start tracking particular ADS-B frequencies of drones, you know, they haven't got the hardware capabilities to update that or to have that in place. They don't have necessarily the infrastructure to be able to handle that. There are other issues as well that were being pushed from the RPAS community, where actually ICAO in some cases have been too slow. You know, they were involved with a particular project, and the technology advancement had outpaced the work that they were doing to try and keep in line with it. So in some cases, you've got issues where they're trying to do better for the UAS community and pass out information, standardization for various different things. And the regulators at their end, in some cases, don't have the resources to be able to jump on it, to be able to push forward with it, to implement it. And then there are other areas where, from the technical kind of side, with technology, and again, me and you both know how fast this industry moves with technology, with tracking, the payload systems, etc. So they're trying to provide guidance, even on those sides of things, about the capabilities of some aircraft. But the time they go to deliver that guidance, whether it's a 12-month time or an 18-month timeline, their technology has moved on again. So it's like they're forever chasing their tails. And again, so they've set up now a group of RPAS, professionals, kind of executives, like an advisory board. So Mike Gadd from the UK CAA, he's involved from a regulator point of view. And there's some other regulators involved as well. And there's also people from operational perspectives. I think it's about 15, 20 guys involved. And they'll review all of the papers that are being submitted to ICAO for ideas and proposals and what can be achieved. And we've heard about some of those this week. Just off the top of my head, we had NASA talking this week about some of the projects that they have going on. The guys are doing 40 flights a month. Actually, let me rephrase, 40 operations a month. So I don't know if that's flights or operations, and operations can contain 10 flights, but 40 operations a month, 8 to 10 solid flying days a month. And that's to try and look at the avoid, detect, and also how that then relates to the UTM environment.
So that's eight to 10 hours, so potentially 240 hours a month. Is that what you're saying there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and that's impressive for a research centre. So, NASA aren't messing about. They're really pushing forward. It's a shame PK, the guy that's actually in charge of managing and implementing some of the UTM infrastructure, he couldn't make it. He's supposed to be a guest speaker, but for whatever reason, he's not here today, which is a shame because I was actually really looking forward to hearing his presentation. But we'll jump onto the UTM side of things now. So today's the drone enable. It's been currently going on now for the last 2 days. And yesterday, it got a little bit heated on the ICAO panel. It got some discussion going, which is really good to see because people have lots of different ideas about how things should move forward with regards to the UTM. Also, registration. We'll touch on that in a second because that's been today's hot topic. So the UTM, there were discussions yesterday about there should not be necessarily a centralised UTM. There were a couple of people kind of putting that across. It shouldn't just be with one party to be able to manage that. Now, in my opinion, actually, if we do move forward to a UTM, it would be better if it was managed at, let's say, a regulatory level, as opposed to the likes of one individual company managing the whole system, being involved in that system. And then from a liability point of view, I don't know how that would necessarily be managed anyway, but it's still the early days. But Amazon.
But really, I mean, for our dear viewer now, the problem is if they allow one company to be in charge, it will be their proprietary algorithm that is feeding the data into the system, and then we'll be trapped into a system. If they're going to do anything, it's got to be an open, free and fair system, as it were. I hope maybe you could unpack, that's my biggest worry, so maybe you could just say what was said around that sort of thing.
Yeah, so at the moment, there has been no mention of the pay-to-fly, pay-to-play kind of aspects. I mean, that hasn't even been discussed, and I guess some of the bits I took away from this week is at the moment they're talking high-level flying aircraft. At the moment, well, actually, at the beginning of the week they were talking high-level. Then we had a presenter from Singapore where it's just completely urban. There is nowhere really safe to fly a drone in Singapore. So they're looking at the aspects from an urban environment. It's really complex, really busy airspace that they have there. So just to touch on, just to go back to what we initially started talking about with regards to the UTM, no one has mentioned this pay-to-play kind of thing, but I think the people that are going to be paying for it are going to be the commercial organisations that want to send a drone from A to B. This is my interpretation. So if you imagine it like a toll fee, so every time you want to use highway A to B through an automated UTM system, there is going to be a charge. This is, again, how I see it in my opinion moving forward. It might not be necessarily how it ends out. It's just my opinion. For the normal hobbyists, etc., that are generally flying, you know, you're not going to be flying automated systems. You fly them because you enjoy flying them manually. So all that will happen with your information is you would just populate the UTM to say, I'm here, I am flying. So when you do have a commercial system flying on an automated path, it can be aware of you, and it then can avoid you and choose an alternative path to move through.
Did you get a feel? You sent. I'm sorry if I'm driving you around, but I know you've got a short time, and I want to ask you a couple of things. Did you get a sense that the big box players, shall we say, and that's the delivery drone people, I have heard are very keen to get model aircraft kept in their fields and you know, really contain the existing industry? Did you get a sense of that? Did you get a sense of, well, of course, model airplanes will be where we're going to let them fly, and everything else is avoiding manned aircraft, or were they going to let my 13-year-old lad be? And how, as I sit in a field in Africa, how's my 13-year-old lad going to connect to a UTN system where there's no internet?
Okay, so before we touch on that, then I just want to, with regards to the UTM, I just want to say that Amazon, because obviously you're talking about delivery, Amazon came up with actually a proposal that probably lines in the way that you think with regards to how you would like the UTM to be. So they were talking about localized authentication servers. So the UTM could end up being a cluster of authenticating servers. So it isn't managed by one sole person. What you end up creating is a mesh network of corporate systems that want to operate automated systems talking to each other across a mesh. So to put that into layman's terms, let's take how an email system works. So if I want to send an email to anyone within my organization, it gets processed through a local server and is managed internally with no external involvement, because my system knows the direction of the email from A to B. It knows what routes of traffic it has to pass through the system to get from A to B. And that's absolutely fine. Now, if I want to send an email to you, Gary, it has to leave my email system, go through several other systems, and then arrive at you. But it means that our systems then end up being synchronized. And I've got a copy of the email that I sent, and you've got a copy of the email received. So what Amazon are proposing, let's take that aspect here, they're proposing that organizations that want to operate automated systems essentially have, I guess, like a hyperlocal UTM. So my organization would have a server, your delivery system would have a server, and we would have a messaging system saying, oh, look, you know, Amazon 1 has got a delivery plan today, and UPS 2 has got a delivery plan today, and they're aware of the proposed routes that they're going to take. And whilst they're in flight, the systems are constantly communicating between the two, the traffic that's being managed. So we've moved away from this central idea of the UTM system now, and we've got this hyperlocal system where all these computers are now talking to one another and managing themselves. And from an IT perspective, that isn't actually a bad idea, because again, if you have one central UTM and that UTM goes down, does then everyone stop flying?
Yes. Yeah, no, I hear you there.
So now moving to the question you asked with registration and the UTM integration with your son flying. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, with you using the free apps and you just notify, here I am flying. Yes, you would plug into a UTM of some form, because they want the automated and the manned aviation to be aware of where hobbyists are flying. They're not necessarily going to say the kind of pigeonhole where you want to be able to fly, but there is talk definitely about geofencing large cities, sensitive sites, as we already experience with certain manufacturers and the products that they provide anyway. But from the registration perspective, there's been lots of discussions at the ICAO level about what that could look like, and they are providing advice across the board to organisations that are here. Italy have already got theirs in place. They've just kind of jumped ahead and they already have something implemented. It's currently live. As we know, the FAA tried to sort something out. It didn't kind of work, but they still have almost 1 million people registered. I spoke with Mike Gadd this week from the UK CAA, had some really good chats with him. The UK registration system a proposal is going to be drafted and presented to the government. They'll then have to wait for feedback to make sure it meets the government's requirements and what they want. And I guess maybe we'll see something, into the early part, maybe middle of next year, moving forward with that. But there is a consensus that they want to get aircraft registered, and that includes whether you're flying a UAS with a camera, a system without a camera, and I think model aircraft. But with the model aircraft,
do you think when you said that will it be the aircraft or will it be the person?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question, because a manufacturer this morning proposed that the tracking capability, so just to put registration to one side for one moment, proposed that they do the tracking from the C2 link, so from the transmitter, from the command module, whether it's a laptop.
Would that manufacturer sorry, I'm passing in, would send me a press release to post as soon as this is finished, and would they begin with a D and end in an I?
That I couldn't possibly confirm, Gary, you know that. But what they did say was that they wanted to be able to provide telemetry data and identification data about that aircraft and its owner over the C2 link. Now, there are a couple of issues around that, in my opinion, because you have limitations in countries about the power output from those systems in the first place, and if your nearest Wi-Fi repeater is 5 miles from where you are, you're not going to be able to transmit that signal.
Can I just put my hand up and ask you? Can I just put your hand up for a note of clarity?
Yeah.
So does that mean that as the either a law enforcement agent or as the quote unquote UTM, I would listen out for the C2 link, and the name and address would be encoded on that C2 link? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, there are proposals about it just being an ID and an aircraft serial number, and then that would then link to a registration system to identify.
But would I have to receive? Would I have to receive that signal?
No, that would go into a central location. I'm guessing a UTM or a central managed system, maybe by an authority, and then they would then be able to see that data. But the concern I have is, if it's on a C2 link, we all know that we can plot with most of our aircraft a waypoint mission. We all can also, as we sometimes do, in certain environments where we deem it safe to be, that if the radio drops out on a fail-safe and it's on a waypoint mission, we can program that aircraft to continue flying that mission. Because it's GPS guided, we've got GPS redundancy, we know it can get from A to B absolutely fine. So then, if someone was to be malicious and then turn off the C2 link, how do you then transmit the aircraft location?
I'm still a little bit lost here. I'm still a little bit lost here, David. That C2 link, is that then going via an app to the internet and to the UTM, or is the UTM expected to hear that C2 link and then decode it and pull it into the UTM?
Yes, so essentially they'll use existing infrastructure, cell towers, Wi-Fi's to pick up the signal however it's transmitted from the C2 receiver. But my argument is that's all well and good. Great, but if you've got someone with malicious intent, you can set that aircraft on a waypoint mission with the fail-safe disabled and turn off the C2 link. So the aircraft is now flying in autonomous mode with no transmission capabilities to say, here I am flying. And that's wrong in my opinion. That's not the right way to do it.
And did they have an answer? Did they have an answer to that then? Did you put that to them and did they have an answer?
I did, and the gentleman in question tried to answer it in a way that he was saying, well, if the system's fully autonomous, we would have to then develop further software updates for it then to transmit from the aircraft. So it then completely countered his proposal that he'd put in place in first. So I just took it as a bit of a fluff answer. I just think that the gentleman was thinking on his feet and maybe wasn't expecting such a technical question.
Not thought it through, yeah.
Yeah, but back to registration, they haven't necessarily picked whether it's going to be an aircraft yet or whether it'll be the person. I think in this case, from what I've seen from the examples, it is likely to be the user will register and then potentially register multiple aircrafts then against the user. Everyone else seemed to be talking about the tracking of the aircraft themselves whilst they're in flight. And again, no one else mentioned trying to track it from the C2 link. Maybe they've done a bit of forward thinking like I had and thought, not really the best way because it needs to be on the aircraft. And again, the other scenario you could have with that has lost power in flight. What is the aircraft going to do? It's going to kick into a fail-safe mode. So even when you're flying manually with a fail-safe enabled, if you lose power to your transmitter, that system will then fly autonomously to the location you deemed it for it to be safe to land. Return to home, to a hold point, descend where it is. Now, in that scenario, that aircraft could be 500, 600 meters away from you. If you get a low-flying aircraft coming in to that area that has the ability to capture ADS-B, let's say, whilst it's in flight, and that aircraft is not transmitting because it's expecting the transmission to be done from the C2 link, again, you end up in a scenario where you've got this aircraft in airspace that's unidentifiable and untrackable. So again, it just doesn't make sense to do it from the C2 link. It really doesn't.
Well, it's very short. You're going to have a heck of a network of receivers to make that work. It's going to have to be an amazeballs network of receivers.
So the manufacturer in question also alluded to that they now have developed a hardware system that has the ability to receive and decode the RF transmissions that are being sent from this system, and they currently have it in place around 3 airports in Japan. So, okay. And they clearly told us the name was on there, the serial number, I think there was a contact telephone number, and the ID also for registration that had been implemented. Now, as me and you know, there are people in our industry that have the capability to access that data and potentially exploit and highlight the security concerns around that. And they do it to show the industry that there are weaknesses, as do other experts in security, data security do. But then there could be someone with malicious intent that could intercept that data. You know, that's your public proprietary data. Do you really want people to be able to intercept that kind of identification, identity details about you while you're operating your system?
Well, I mean, straight off the top of my head, it'll have... sorry, David, again, I'm jumping in, but straight off the top of my head, it'll have commercial value if you're doing, if you're company A and you're inspecting factory or facility B 3 times a week, then I could gather data on exactly when the flights are happening, what you're doing. I don't know how I'd leverage it. Well, maybe I'd just keep an eye on you. I could keep an eye on a company and see what they're doing, what they're actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, this week in the summary, there's been lots of discussions, some great speakers, some not so great speakers, you know, and for me, it's been a real insight to see kind of where the regulations and things are going at the top level, not just personally, but for the items that I'm working on at a commercial level with Consortiq. And it just enables us to be at the forefront of where the strategy is going with the aerospace industry, I guess we could call it, because when we talk about these autonomous systems now, that was another thing. I'll stop my train of thought for a moment. There's a bit of a debate. There seems to be, in some cases and some opinions, that we're going to have pilots forever. Not going to happen. And that, again, highlighted an interesting debate. And I did put forward a question, but it didn't get asked because I said, well, how can you explain the systems that are already operating autonomously within the industry already with regards to UAS? But then also within manned aviation, you know, some airlines with specific aircraft, if they are coming into land and the weather conditions are beyond what they deem to be pilot limits, the aircraft will land using the autonomous mode. Not a lot of people realise that and know about that. And it was really interesting to hear because we're already doing it in manned aviation. Why don't you do it in unmanned aviation?
Well, it's also, we're also doing it in some ways in our industry because the armies of the world have a lower accident rate than the air forces of the world, because the armies auto land and the air force chaps try and be heroes and land manually or take off manually, and we have no end of accident. You just look at our industry. The autonomous stuff lives longer. That doesn't have the
No, I
answer.
know. There was also there's also been discussions outside of the conference amongst people about ATC controllers being in fear of the jobs with the UTM development, etc. And my suggestion is actually that we utilise these guys and their knowledge from manned aviation. I mean, they've been managing airspace for years. Why do we need to reinvent the wheel? Why can we not draw on their experience if this is the way we're going to move forward and have them help us develop and manage this airspace? Because we've got organisations that are doing these UTMs that have very limited aviation knowledge. They have maybe no experience with regards to ATCs, the flight planning profiles of particular aircrafts. And I just think it's something that should be thought about. The other interesting point, actually, I keep remembering, but it's been such a busy week. There was a great presentation from Boeing, and they were talking about how RPAS will integrate with the ATM and the UTM, etc., and everything else. And one of the interesting points that I thought was really great to highlight was, and to think about, is that if you're putting an aircraft in the airspace where you have got the likes of Boeing 747s, etc., flying, the aircraft that you're using must be able to match the flight characteristics with regards to performance, maneuverability, the turning circles, the landing approaches, the takeoffs, because you're not going to have manned aviation all of a sudden go, right, okay, well, we need to redesign all of the performance profiles of manned aviation to meet that of unmanned. It isn't going to happen. If you are putting an aircraft at 30,000 feet, 25,000 feet, it needs to match the performance characteristics of manned aviation. Otherwise, they're going to end up stacking planes up just so you can get an aircraft to come into land. The other suggestion was, well, creating a manned apron at each airport. If you're going to be operating these kind of aircrafts from airports, then putting a separate apron for them, which is possible. But I think the simple fact is that if you are putting that kind of aircraft up at that altitude, it needs to match the performance characteristics. So I agree with what the guy from Boeing was saying.
But I think there was a bit of another reality, and I know you've got time, but another reality of that is there aren't going to be many. We've probably got the total number of aircraft in that class. You're talking the Predator and Avenger class there. They're probably already out there, and we probably don't need any more. The stuff from our world's going to be persistent, super high level stuff, and it ain't going to need a runway. It is for the takeoff. Then it's going to be up there, and it's going to stay up there. So it's that's almost Boeing. That's Boeing selling. Is it Boeing that does the global? Whatever they're selling, that's him selling whatever they sell. Scan Eagles.
I knew you'd find a way to twist this. But the other thing is, right, so that's the other thing. So everyone was talking about, oh yeah, well, for taking off, we need the aircraft to circle and kind of spiral up into the airspace. We have VTOL capabilities now. The Osprey, why not, when you start looking at manned aviation, think about how the airspace is managed at the moment, and could it be made more efficient now as we move to unmanned? We start utilising these VTOL systems, because the management of the airspace surely would be so much more easier if you're able to incorporate VTOL systems where you haven't got a glide approach to deal with, you haven't got to worry about putting them into holding patterns, they'll just sit and hover.
But surely it's all easier than this, isn't it? The manned aircraft will be going out on and approaching on runway heading, certainly for the last 2 miles and 2 miles after takeoff, for after takeoff checks. Why not just make the unmanned aircraft climb up and have a 45-degree offset to what the manned aircraft's doing, or come in at a 45-degree offset, then they're not on the same track until the very end. I mean,
maybe again. I'm no ATC controller, I'm no airspace expert, but for me, just for common sense, with the technology we've got now and the technology that's moving forward,
were people not overthinking it? Were they not overthinking it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overthinking sometimes with some of the discussions that have gone on this week. And I think some people have their own agendas also in the industry, as is with any kind of session like this. But you just try to remain impartial, and from these, I'm just taking from it what.
There was one thing I saw that caught. How many minutes have you got with us, mate? I know you've got another meeting.
I'm overrunning slightly, so
all right, all
2
right.
more minutes.
Just let's make this the last thing, and then I'll let you go off. I would normally say off to get cakes, but you've been exercising and other good things, so no, you're not off to get cakes.
Yeah,
But
no
multi-band spatial broadcast, MBSB, multi-band spatial broadcast. What was that all about?
Okay, crikey, I've got some notes in my in the book. I'm trying to think now. Okay, so I think that what they were talking about with that was the ability to send from the aircraft, directly from the aircraft, the telemetry data. This was Geo Networks, I think, was the company that did this proposal, if I remember rightly. If I remember rightly, they were saying that we could use the existing infrastructure that we've got, the cell towers, the Wi-Fi modules, etc., and transmit data over the multispectral messaging system, I think it was called, because there's not a restriction on the number of characters you can have. So there would be then no need to add ADS-B transponders, 3 or 4G transponders. You know, you could have it sent over directly from the aircraft with a special chip that you could then say to the manufacturers, moving forward, it must have this chipset implemented, you know, for all aircraft. So then you're not mackling stuff about on top of it, strapping on ADS-B transponders. It would have the ability to just transmit it using a local infrastructure. And again, people keep thinking that the biggest risk with all this is up at 30,000 feet. The USA has nearly 1 million registered systems flying up to 400 feet. So is it going to become the norm that the sub 400 feet airspace becomes busier with our UAS systems than manned aviation? And in fact, in South Africa, they predict in the next 12 months that unmanned flights will far exceed manned flights.
Oh, they will do now. They will do now. We've got 8,000
in the next 12 months.
We've got 8,000 registered aircraft here. Boom, there's 8,000 aircraft. That's it. So already there's, I tell you, there's way more than 8,000 RPAS down here.
You've probably got 1,000 in your garage, Gary.
Well, there's that. There is that.
In bits.
Yes. You've been talking to my wife. No, we could rant on forever here, and I've got to let you go on your. Yeah, I wanted to ask you. No, it doesn't matter. We'll do that. Well, when are you? Will you be back in time for this Tuesday at 2100 GMT when we normally all hang out?
I'll try. We'll see what the jet lag's like.
Yeah, not to worry. Otherwise, we'll do it the following one. Because, dear viewer, if you're here for the first time, we do hang out. Oh, I know what I wanted to say before I went to that last piece. Has the news of the Black Hawk in New York gone through the halls there?
Yeah, well, actually, there's a few of us that have been discussing it this morning. Actually, I was actually talking to Ron Campbell from SGS. He's an air safety advisor for SGS. Everyone probably knows who SGS are. A big auditing compliance aviation company. And then me and him were talking about it yesterday. And apparently, they actually found traces of the plastic from the UAS still embedded in the rotor propeller of the aircraft. I'm going to try and keep on top of this because I'd like to know, exactly what happened. Because if it is, probably one of the arms confirmed.
One of the arms was went into one of the vents. They've got the last about that much with a motor on the end of it. It's white with a silver motor.
Well, in that case, then that has just put the icing on the cake for everyone that's pushing for registration. For those, that argue about registration, those kind of incidences are what driving the registration, the tracking. It isn't going to go away. For those of us that wanted to, if we're being really honest, it isn't going to go away. And, as long as you are flying safely and are operating within your limits and flying responsibility, there should be no concerns. In my opinion.
I should add a caveat to that, I suppose. Allegedly, there is a photo of a chap with it in a bag, so in an evidence bag. So I should add the caveat, allegedly, there to that. And if you look back through some of the videos from this week, dear viewer, you'll see I've got footage from Texas of a guy flying over some Black Hawks on the ground, hovering, and one flies in front of him. So I was lucky that I put that up on Wednesday. Topical. But anyway, David, I must let you go. Thank you very much indeed for taking your time out there over lunch in between meetings in Montreal from the ICAO meeting and the ICAO drone prepare, I think it was. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Maybe we'll see you this Tuesday at 2100 GMT when we normally meet, but probably the week after, because you'll have to catch up with the family and jet lag will not be on your side. Cheers, mate. Thanks very much.
All the best.
Okay, take care. Cheers.